welcome to Our Special Lives. I'm Laura McGrath, and today we are talking to Dr. Erin Hartman, who is a board-certified physician in family medicine and integrative medicine. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a very important nutrient for special needs children. We're going to talk about what it is and how you can incorporate it into your child's diet. And before we get started, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. Hi, Dr. Hartman. Welcome to Our Special Lives.
Great. Thanks. Great to be here, Laura. Good to be with you and your audience.
Oh, great. So before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into functional medicine, what led you down this path?
So basically, I got down this path for my daughter. My wife is a pediatric OT whose field of specialty was kids with special needs. And our first daughter was actually one of her patients that she started taking care of as soon as she was out of the hospital. And so when she was about 12 months old, plus or minus, her foster home was disappearing and she needed a new home. And so my wife asked me, and I was like, sure, why not? Being a guy, I was like, we can always give her back, right? So and I was like, we'll take her in. She needs a home. Why not? You're laughing because, guys are guys, So anyway, and I fell in love with her. And that's kind of the history, When we first had her in our home, one of the first decisions we had to do was placing a feeding tube. She has cerebral palsy. Actually, her diagnosis was questionable, whether it's spastic quadriplegia or hemi, or is she a bihemi? It's all these kind of bizarre, weird things. But the gist was that she was really small and needed food. And so they recommended a feeding tube for her. And so my wife being a pediatric OT, we were told that my daughter would never talk. She'd never walk. When we first got her, she couldn't sit up on her own. She'd put her up and she'd just fall right over. When she was 2 years old, all she said was hi, but our goals were big. We had grand, my wife said there's something there. And I just kind of went with it. And so when they said, let's put a tube in, I knew we talked back and forth. I knew it would affect her ability to talk. Chewing and swallowing is huge for speech. I knew it would affect her ability to crawl. It's kind of hard to crawl when you got a thing coming out of your stomach. And so what we did was we just decided not to, and just to really, really work on feeding, which changed the trajectory of my medical career and our family and everything. But 6 months later, and this is where it gets interesting, my wife found a pediatric growth chart for kids with cerebral palsy. And my daughter was in the 50th percentile. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, how did this pediatric GI expert, whose main job is to put in feeding tubes and scopes and stuff for kids with special needs, not know that kids with cerebral palsy have a special growth chart? And so that was the first inkling of questioning medical dictates, questioning authority, basically. And that kind of led me slightly off the beaten path. And as we just did more and more things with our daughter, eventually went, and we actually, this is actually how I met you. Actually, we did ponds in Canada. And so actually I went up there and did that. Then through the local Richmond Hope, you kind of talk to me about that experience,
Yeah.
So,
and we should have another video on that, but anyway.
Yeah. But the point is like that led me off. That's how far off the path I got, going to another country and doing, oral neurological stimulation to remodulate brain pathways, cool stuff. Right. And that's what led me to change my practice to think outside the box. And after a while, if you think outside the box all the time, you just kind of get out of the box, and so that's kind of what's led my professional career. I was with my research company. I have a research company that does clinical research. And my family, everything about our family has changed. The food we eat, where we live, how we relate with each other has changed because of my daughter.
That's awesome. I love that story. Well, today we're going to talk about a nutrient that you have identified as being really critical for special needs kids. And I'm guessing it's probably your experience that kids aren't getting enough of this nutrient.
Right.
So let's talk about it.
So this nutrient makes up about 80% of your brain mass, which is huge. It covers all of your nerves. Every cell, actually, the structure of it is made of this. Your hormones are made out of it. I could go on and on and on, but you get the drift. Actually, the mucus lining your gut, kids with special needs, autism have gut bacterial issues. The mucus that actually protects your gut is made of these things. And what these are lipids, omega-3s, omega-6s, phosphatidylcholine, phospholipids, healthy fats. And it's something that has changed the trajectory of my daughter's health. We've actually done, and it's really kind of interesting because the Kennedy-Kruger Institute, which is the top lipid lab in the world, you can actually test it at this place and they get evaluated through neurolipid and actually look and take a deep dive into actually the what makes up the membranes of your child's cells. This is super, super highly specialized, obviously, but before we knew what that was, we were doing it just by changing our dietary habits. And it's one of those things we kind of fell into accidentally. And probably 10 years later, I actually learned the science behind why fats and lipids, omega-3s, omega-6s, phospholipids, all these things are so ridiculously important, especially for any child with any neurological issues.
Let's talk about why this population of kids may be deficient in this nutrient.
It's largely, you have to look at our food system. We've removed fats from, low fat is all, was the rage for 2 decades. And we had a lot of moms having babies who were told, hey, eat low fat, and became essential fatty acid deficient. All the foods we consume, the fast food, the fried foods, those are all partially plasticized oils. So you think your computer, your laptop, your car, that used to be a liquid. Petroleum is a liquid, and you take it, you can turn it into a hard substance. That's what margarine is. That's what, I can't believe it's not butter if they even still make that stuff. That's, the shelf life of food products is because you take these things that have a shelf life, or, butter should go bad. Olive oil should go bad. But if you take, corn oil, avocado oil, canola oil, other vegetable oils, and you partially hydrogenate them, you make them semi-solids. And now that's in our entire food system. And kids, it's in kids' foods, it's in biles, it's in mom's foods. And so what happens is this gets into your cell membranes, and the cell membranes that are supposed to be flexible and pliable. Think about that, that balloon you can turn and twist to make animals out of. Mm-hmm. That's very plastic. The word plastic comes from plasticity. It means you can move really easy. What happens when you get these bad fats and they become very hard and rigid, and that affects everything in your cell metabolism. That affects, if you've talked about mitochondria before, actually, insufficiencies of the right omega-3 and 6 balance affects mitochondria's ability to make energy, which with any kid with any neurological issues, almost by definition, has mitochondrial issues. And so all of a sudden, root cause for a lot of these things might be, in addition to chemicals and toxins, et cetera, just the imbalance of healthy fats in the American diet.
So let's talk about what you would consider to be a bad fat versus what you would consider to be a good fat. As people are reading labels and looking at things they're feeding their kids, what are some things that they could maybe start identifying?
Basically, you want to get as real and unprocessed as possible. In order to take a natural substance, corn oil, avocado oil, any vegetable plant oils, seed oils, flax oil, in order to make those last, you have to do something to them. So the first thing you look in the label is just you look for organic, unadulterated, unhydrogenated oils. Part of the process with one of the issues with most processed foods is by definition they're processed. So something has to happen to the oil. So any kind of boxed foods, if you look at the partially hydrogenated corn salads, partially hydrogenated XYZ, that by definition is a bad, partially rancid fat. And so just sticking with real fats, which means, you're going to go away from a lot of processed. The biggest thing is processed foods. You have to kind of work away from processed foods. And what I tell patients all the time is that it took my wife and I 1.5 years to figure out how to source the food for our family. So when I talk to patients about it, I don't expect it to happen overnight. It's a process. You got to slowly work through it, but you just want to look for, organic things. Avocado oil is a great example. I did not know. I learned this actually from the olive oil tap room here in Richmond. I was talking with them back there in the back. If you want great olive oil in Richmond, go there. They do a great job with it. But I didn't realize that pretty much all the avocado oil in our country is adulterated with canola oils. It's cut with something. So you want to make sure it's not just organic. You want to make sure it's organic from Mexico, because most Mexican products don't cut it with something. It gets kind of it gets really granular and really deep. So you almost have to become your own sleuth with sourcing the stuff.
Yeah. So what I notice in a lot of foods is sunflower oil, safflower oil, and canola oil. Okay. Canola oil's in everything. Even when you go to a grocery store, like a Whole Foods or something like that, they douse their food in canola oil. Can we talk about those three? Because I feel like those are really in everything.
Okay, those are your healthy toxic oils.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about canola oil. Canola oil is actually from the rapeseed plant. Canola oil is just Canadian oil. That's where that term comes from. And rapeseed oil smells terrible. You actually have to deodorize it. So they use a solvent, a petroleum-based solvent, to deodorize it. The process of getting canola oil, actually, it's also a press seed process. So you actually superheat the oil. And when you superheat oil, you make trans fats out of it, and then use a solvent to deodorize it. So, you know, yeah, so much for healthy canola oil. Sunflower and safflower oil, actually, it's can be amazing. They're actually, I use these oils to actually treat my daughter and actually make mayonnaise at home. That's, I call it the brain mayo. But this is where the processing gets huge, and it might be organic, but most sunflower and safflower oil are are pressed. They're not cold pressed. They're actually pressure pressed. And what happens is you actually superheat the oil. You can actually go to YouTube and pull up, canola oil, some sunflower, these other oils, and see the smoke coming off. It's actually the smoke point. So you actually will hit the smoke point with some of these things in the processing. And when you do that, all of a sudden the oil is made rancid. You probably know about with flax oil, for example, when you grind up the flax seeds, and it's outside, the oil will start to oxidize or go rancid within 3 to 4 days. If you grind it up, you want to put in the fridge. If you buy it already ground up, you want to put it in the fridge, or if you open it, it'll stay in the fridge for a week. That's not happening with these. They're actually being heated to process them, and so they're hitting the flash points and becoming rancid oils. The example with fish oil. If you've ever eaten fish before and burped fishy, that's a rancid oil. Omega-3s are great for your brain. Fresh salmon's amazing. You leave it in the fridge for 4 or 5 days and eat it. You burp fishy. That's because it's being oxidized. And that's where some of these oils, the temperature points, it's not just do you cook with sunflower, safflower oil, which you shouldn't, but is the process of getting them out, was it actually a heated process? And so I look for in oils for them to say how they process it, to show that it was a cold processed product, not a general typical mechanical heat extraction process.
Okay. So like in our house, the fats that we use are butter, coconut oil, and olive oil.
Okay.
And those are kind of our basic three.
Okay.
And we're pretty careful about sourcing and that kind of thing. Is that generally what you recommend people stick with, like for cooking and, in things?
I mean, it depends on, you want to use different things. Your 40% of the fats in your red cell membranes are actually saturated fats. That's like your butter, ghee, tallow, your animal-based fats. So you need a source for those. So using like organic grass-fed butter is huge. It's a great start. Getting ghee actually, when they heat the butter, they pull off the protein that kind of burns actually, and you got pure saturated fat full of butyrate, which is great for gut and brain. Coconut oil is a little tricky. Coconut oil, actually, if you have someone who has a really bad gut, you can actually pull some of the toxins across the gut into the liver. So when people do like to get the keto flu, when they're doing lots of keto stuff with coconut oil, some of those people actually are just pulling the toxins across, and that flu is actually those toxins migrating across their gut. So I use it in moderation with that. Extra virgin olive oil is a workhorse, especially if you get really good quality extra virgin olive oil. Again, my new source locally, I used to get olive oil shares from Washington State, but it was really unreliable. And now locally, I get it from the olive oil tap room. They do a good job of sourcing it. But the power from olive oil, actually, it's not essential. Omega-9, the oleic acid, is not essential. What's powerful about the olive oil, or the polyphenols, or the things that give it the color, actually feed the bacteria in your gut and are anti-inflammatory. So all the data with olive oil being anti-inflammatory, decreasing risk for cardiovascular disease, all that kind of stroke, revolves more around the polyphenols, which again, that's where sourcing is huge, because after about 2 years, those kind of degrade. So if you want to, from crush date to consumption date, you want to do that within a year to 18 months. Other oils, as far as omega-3s and 6s, probably the best source for those are your seeds, nuts, and fish. I'm just really careful with seed oils. I have to source those really, really particularly because what we just talked about. But as far as cooking, avocado oil is great. It's kind of sort of like olive oil. It's has more omega-9s. It's not a bioactive lipid. It's not required. Your body doesn't need olive oil or avocado oil, but avocado oil is a good high temperature cooking oil.
Yeah, I use it for roasting
Yeah,
vegetables.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I'll link to some of these, kind of well-sourced oils below. But let's talk about a special needs child. Let's use two scenarios. One, you've got, maybe a child who's on the autism spectrum disorder, who eats by mouth, but maybe just like any other kid isn't eating, a super huge wide variety of foods. And then let's take another example of a child like my son with CP who is, 100% tube fed. And let's talk about what are your recommendations for actually getting a good amount of lipids into like both of these types of kids.
Okay, well, that's where you want to get a high quality lipid, and you want to do something you can actually get in a tube feed or make it palatable. I tend to use Body Bio Balance Oil. There's a 4-to-1 ratio of omega 6s to omega 3s. It's actually based on research from Dr. Yehuda Schoenfeld over in the University of Tel Aviv. And basically, it's balanced to match your cells, and it's a cold processed oil. And I'll use that as a base in smoothies. I'll use phosphatidylcholine, which is another phospholipid that's important for cell membrane structure. And I'll basically take those and put them in smoothies. I'll use whatever base you want to use, whether it's coconut milk, regular water, kombucha, kefir, yogurt, whatever. I'll use that as a base, and then put in the oils, the lipids into that. Put in my protein. Depending on if your kid. A lot of these kids that are special needs kids have connective tissue issues, so they need more collagen. So I'll throw a couple scoops of collagen in there, or scoop of collagen in there. I make enough smoothies in the morning for 4 people, so I'm throwing multiple scoops of stuff in. So, and then you want your minerals, because one of the things with fats that's super important is fats have actually the cell membranes have minerals, amino acids, receptors, and stuff. And so I tend to mix all those things together. Use like magnesium, potassium, trace minerals, and I put that in a blender, a nice blender, and blend it up. And then like for the texture, I'll use what my kids' texture is, what their flavor is. So then use whatever your frozen fruit or ripe banana or whatever for flavoring. And then for texture, I will use different fibers. If your kids like a little more like actually kind of feel something, I might use more of a flax to grind up in there, because you actually feel that in your mouth. If you want just to thicken a little bit without the texture, you can use chia. Sometimes I'll use konjac root powder as a fiber. It makes it more like almost like a slimy gelatinous feel to it. And just need to kind of find what the kid, obviously for these kids with texture issues, to kind of find out what they like. I also will put nuts in there. Dr. Patricia Kane at the Neurolipid Clinic, like she deals with tons and tons of tube-fed kids, and she has these seed oils and all kinds of stuff she does. And it's like a seed cream where she'll take sunflower, chia, flax, almonds, pecans, and basically ground to make like a nut butter, and then you will feed that to the use that as your quote unquote peanut butter. Peanut butter, by the way, is terrible for kids' brains. It's lots of mold. It's probably one of the worst things you can do. So one of the things we use is nutso, which is basically cashews, almonds, et cetera, et cetera. But you can make your own thing, but just you have to figure out what the kids' texture issues may be, and that's where, smoothie versus crunchy, smooth and liquidy versus more thick. And then, but just having the base stuff there and using your fiber and your sweeteners, which is like I used to use, frozen fruit, using those to kind of help figure out what the kid will eat, or if it's a tube feed, just,
put it in the tube.
Put in the tube. Yeah.
Yes, that's what we do. Okay. And so you talked about the body, the BioBalance oil, Body Balance Oil, and
Yes.
I'll link to that below. If there are any kind of like whole food sources that parents want to try, what do you recommend with that for omega-3 and 6?
Okay. So, I mean, the natural sources for omega-3s is obviously fish. And one of the things about omega-3s from fish is they have these chemicals called pro-resolving mediators that are amazing for quelling brain inflammation. That's one of the reasons why the omega-3s from fish are different from the omega-3s from flax. I mean, they do different things. They're not quite the same, so if you can do fish, that's awesome. Caviar is very interesting because it's the most dense, salmon roe is the most dense form for actually these pro-resolving mediators. And it's interesting, a little half teaspoon is enough for a week. So it's really kind of, it looks like it's not a lot, but it's actually super powered. Nuts and seeds, sunflower, and then you can actually get in bulk in Richmond, through good foods is like probably the best bulk place in town. Good Health Herbs on this side, on the south side, actually has bulk still, which is huge because like in Richmond, I don't know where you can get bulk stuff anymore in Richmond, besides those 2 places without spending a lot of money. And I'll put the sunflower, and you can use those sunflower seeds for your omega-3s, flax and chia for your omega-3s. I actually make granola for my kids, and it's all nuts. And so
Okay.
it's like it's 3 cups of almonds, probably 2 cups of pecans, a cup of walnuts, half a cup of flax or chia. I'll throw some coconut flakes in there. Use half a cup of olive oil. You soak it, grind it up, and I'll dry it out. And all of a sudden, this granola, which is crazy nutrient dense with tons of trace minerals, is a great source of protein and these healthy fats.
Yeah. That's great. We actually use a cold pressed sockeye salmon oil
Okay.
for my son and his blend, and I can link to that below too. It's
Yeah.
from Vital Choice.
Okay. Good. Okay. They make good
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and actually, it's funny. The veterinary grade, it's exactly the same. It's just not quite as
Yeah.
it's not filtered quite as much. But we
Yeah.
actually just throw that in because into his blend because he's getting it through the feeding tube. It
Yeah.
just affects the taste.
Yeah.
And it's a little less expensive, but that's like another trick
Yeah.
for that. Okay. And so if you get your child on kind of a higher fatty acid lipid diet, what are some of the kind of anecdotal changes that you've seen, like maybe in your daughter or other patients?
So the problem with my daughter is we have done so much. So I'll give an example of a patient who I think is a classic kid came to me. Who knows, the mom might even be watching this right now. I think it was about 3 years old maybe, and came to me because it had terrible eczema. Eczema and gut issues was the reason the mom brought him. That's the only reason he came. Um, they had some mold issues in the house. Mom had some gut issues and hypermobile, which I see in tons and tons of these patients. That hypermobility sets you up for inflammation and nutrient deficiencies. And so with the kid, I was like, okay, let's do some testing. Found he had fatty acid issues. Again, the focus was the skin, right? The skin and the gut. And so I started using body balance oil because I knew that people with eczema have issues with their immune system. It's called the skin associated lymphoid tissue, or SALT, SALT. It's overreactive to the environment. And one of the things you need for that to work appropriately is you need a higher number of omega-6s. So a lot of people who have eczema issues actually tend to have more omega-6 deficiency, which is weird because our diet is crazy high in omega-6s. And so I gave him some body balance oil, did some testing, did some gut stuff. Came back, saw him back 3 months later, gut's doing better, skin's doing better. And the mom's like, oh, by the way, his speech is way better. She never mentioned anything that he was speech delayed, he was developmentally delayed. It was all about his gut and skin. And I was like, you told me in 3 months, his speech is better? Like, forget the skin and the gut. I was like, that was such a profound thing. And because she was so focused on that, my intake is usually 2 hours, as you know, and it didn't come up at all.
Wow.
and the 3 month follow-up was, oh yeah, skin's great, gut's great. Oh, by the way, he's talking better. I was like, what? So that's anecdotal. I have a patient with pandas or PANS. It's actually, it's kind of weird because he's got this, not really pandas or PANS. It's more like autism spectrum disorder with some PANS on top of it. Obviously, with those patients, there's a lot of environmental toxins. Their house is really moldy and they're close to a reservoir and all the neighbors spray. It's just, the toxic conundrum. But been pushing lots of lipids with him, and he's 10 now. Started working with him 2.5 years ago, and his behavior is much better. He's doing less stimming, with which that for those, it's like the handshaking, head bobbing kind of stuff when the kids like that get overactive, they kind of have body movements related to it.
Almost like a tick.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm assuming most of your
Viewers.
Audience, viewers. Yeah. I'm sorry, audience viewers. What do you call them? your people know what that is. But those are gone. And so the thing about it, the problem is I'm never just doing that. I'm usually doing a whole thing. I'm usually doing a whole nutritional analysis. I mean, a lot of these kids, the vitamin D levels are low. They need more C. Their trace minerals are low. A lot of their antioxidants are off. They have gut issues. So you're doing gut evaluation. It's really interesting how a lot of the autism literature now is looking at the gut as being the priming event for neural development. Mm-hmm. And so you might have a trigger, a head concussion, multi-house, tick bite, vaccine, recurrent antibiotic exposure, but the gut, that microenvironment, is actually the priming thing. It sets you up for this autistic decline. They're doing actually stool transplants now, research on stool transplants to treat autism.
Wow.
So it's
really interesting.
It's really interesting because then you realize, how do oils affect that gut balance, the bacteria? And that's how olive oil is super powerful with its effect on your gut microbiome.
Mm-hmm. And just what we know about brain function in general. I mean, as you said at the beginning of our talk, 80% of our brain is comprised of fatty acids, and That's correct?
Yeah, yes,
80%. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's,
Fat. Yeah, between the
yeah,
cells, everything's fat. Yeah.
yeah. And that fat is absolutely critical for neurotransmitter, activity and synaptical activity and all of that. So it would make sense that as your fatty acid profile got better, that activity would improve.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, and I'm doing, and with these patients, I'm doing like everything.
Yeah.
Just not just, I'm doing fatty acids, also gut stuff, environmental things, therapy. Like this stuff like makes the therapy you're doing work better.
Hmm.
One of the things with my daughter, she has cerebral palsy, typically with kids, and my wife is, pediatric OT, and a bunch of her friends are OTs. And typically with kids with CP, when they get to be 7 to 9, that's kind of, they don't progress. Like they kind of hit their stop point, and that's kind of like their life. Our daughter's never stopped progressing.
Wow, that's
She's
awesome.
14 now. She's walking with forearm crutches. Um, she's actually, my wife did a video comparing 2 years ago. She can actually now on the floor, get up in a wheelchair by herself, set herself down, and then get back out again.
It's incredible.
2 years ago, she couldn't do that at all. And so it's like, what are we doing? And the answer is like everything.
Yeah.
The foundation. I think the thing to the parents is like the most important things aren't that we went to Canada, did ponds, or that I did fancy lipid therapy at Kennedy Kruger, or that I got a neuromuscular stimulation device for her feet, or I've got ones for her legs. Actually, we're using now, that's helping with her muscle. The most foundational thing was the diet, because if you don't have the right building blocks, you can't repair. Yes, we've boosted everything with all the interventions, but diet has been the crucial thing, which it's hard, it's difficult, it's costly, but it's within your control.
So if a parent is hearing this and kind of evaluating their child's diet and, thinks that, I have two questions actually, thinks that this might be helpful, is there a test that they can get to show their child's fatty acid profile or whether there's a deficiency?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple ways. Usually you have to work with a functional medicine practitioner who can order it and evaluate it, because it's not just ordering the test; you have to interpret it. There's a lot of labs that order. You can actually get through LabCorp. The problem with the LabCorp test is that they don't put it in the order I like to see it, so it makes it hard for me to interpret it. Quest does it as well, but theirs is totally disordered, so it's really hard to interpret. So I tend to use Genova Diagnostics. Vibrant Labs is another place that actually does that. You can actually direct order the stuff from there, and parents can actually go to these places and like for LabCorp, and just ask for the testing without a physician ordering it. It's just you have to pay cash for it. There's a place called One Labs, I believe, that works through Quest, where you actually get discounts on labs, so you can actually go and ask for labs you want. It's just then you have to know what to do with them. That's the difficult thing, is finding a practitioner who can actually guide you through that, because there's not a lot of us out there. So
yeah, I'm going to link to the Institute for Functional Medicine, and there's find a practitioner in there, and people can enter their zip code and find a functional practitioner in their area. But so you mentioned Genova. What's the name of that test? Is it just like a fatty acid profile?
Yeah, there's a fatty acid profile, which is a blood test, which is just by itself. I personally like to do either their ion profile or their NutriVal or the metabolomics. Those are 3 different tests. The metabolomics is actually a finger prick test. The nice thing about that is if I have a patient, out of state, I can send it to them in the mail. They do a blood spot. It doesn't give me all the information I want, but it gives me like the basic 3s, basic 6s kind of data. Plus it gives me the gut evaluation, nutritional evaluation, a whole bunch of stuff. The ion evaluation, the ion is like the big deep dive. It requires a blood draw and urine. So basically you have to be physically with someone to do that one. And the same thing for the NutriVal. But the metabolomics is something that can be mailed to them. You just have to find a practitioner that would work with you with that. And then Vibrant Labs is another one that has like blood spot testing. They probably have the best price point. They've actually developed a new technology, actually, that allows smaller amounts of blood to be used. It's almost like a micropipette technology, so you can actually get more blood testing on less amounts. So you can actually, the price point for their labs is a lot cheaper when you compare to like LabCorp and Quest. So those are some options. You just need to make sure you're working with someone who knows how to interpret them.
And let's say that you decide you're listening to this and you're kind of evaluating what your child's been eating and think, it would be probably beneficial if I kind of changed around the oils that my kid's eating. maybe start incorporating some of the body balance oil or some of the, maybe some cold pressed salmon oil or combination olive oil, those sorts of things. How long does it take for your cells to be able to uptake those new lipids and, basically change out your oil in your body to a better functioning?
Well, it is. It's actually Dr. Heyman up at George Washington, who's like the guru for mold CRS patients. He refers to it as an oil change because in any chronic inflammatory condition, you get hit the flashpoint, the cooking flashpoint in your body. You've got burnt oil, so you have to do an oil change. And so, he says, if you think about the red cell life cycle is like 120 days. So I tell people, you'll get a big bang for your buck in the first 4 months, but if you want to do a whole body oil change, you're probably looking at 1 to 2 years.
Okay.
So that's where consistency, and probably the biggest thing is, realize if it's almost like putting oil in your car. You have beautiful, clean oil you put in the car. You could just dump out the oil pan right now and be black because there's stuff still in there. It's just, you have to keep on putting in and not put more burnt used oil in your body, which is hard. Today.
So it's a two-pronged thing. It's adding the good oils and also removing the bad oils.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. You can't just put good stuff in. You have to get the bad stuff out.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Well, this has been so helpful. I just had one more question for you. So what happens if, I know a lot of kids in this audience are on acid blockers. And I think I remember from a prior conversation that that can be an issue for kind of breaking down these fatty acids and assimilating them. So if a kid is on an acid blocker, other than going off the acid blocker, which we were able to do. So, it may be something at some point to talk to your doctor about. But is there something like a supplement that maybe parents can give so that it can help absorb a little more?
Yeah. So basically you can use ox bile. It's basically bile from an ox, from a cow, and it has TUDCA, phosphatidylcholine. Actually, ox bile is a powerful thing to help brains. If you do a Google Scholar search and you look up TUDCA, TUDCA, which stands for torso-deoxycholic acid. I just have to say that a couple times a day, so I'll forget the word because it's a long one. So, but that actually helps burn off toxins off your cell membranes. There's research using that to treat ALS and other neurological issues. So actually, the bile is a powerful scrubber of your cell membranes, and so you can use bile as a dual purpose to help your body absorb the fats, as well as to help burn off those toxins particularly on your mitochondrial cell membranes. The problem with some people get reflux from ox bile or other digestive enzymes. If your kid's on a proton pump inhibitor, that's obviously a big deal because it suppresses stomach acid production. You tend to get more bacterial overgrowth, more yeast overgrowth in your GI tract. Certain nutrients
suppresses B uptake.
Yes. So certain nutrients exactly require acid for absorption. So typically when you're taking an acid block, you're usually doing it for slow motility in the GI tract, which could be neurologic. It could be slow transition because you're eating rancid foods, processed foods. A lot of people get reflux just from the foods they eat. And it's actually, the reflux is actually called NERDS, non-erosive reflux disease. It's actually not a low stomach acid issue. It's a motility issue. So what happens is you suppress the stomach acid and the reflux actually gets worse, but you don't feel it.
Yeah.
So you can be an adult on a proton blocker and still get strictures. So that's where, if you're on a proton blocker, trying to figure out why, is it, dietary related? Is it, if it's obviously kids that have a lot of neurological issues, it could be primarily a motor issue. And that's where maybe using enzymes can be helpful to kind of help absorption of these things. Orals do take a little more to be absorbed as well. So some kids who have reflux issues, the orals might make it a little worse. So that's where if you do tube feeds, maybe spreading out throughout the day can make it a little easier to digest.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say you had mentioned the ox bile and the TUDCA. Are those one and the same, or are they two separate things?
Well, the two separate products. Ox bile, I usually use Allergy Research Group for that. They're very particular about organic, grass-fed animals. And then TUDCA is actually now Body Bio actually now makes that product as well. It's really tricky with a lot of these products. They actually get mold in them. Even like collagen, something as simple as collagen, I use a lot. It's amazing how lots of collagen gets mold in it because they pull the cow hides off and let them lay around and then process them. Kind of like corn sits in silos for months and gets moldy. And a lot of these kids with neurological issues, they have like exquisite sensitivity to mold toxins.
Mhm.
So it's just, that's where, with collagen is making sure you're getting clean collagen. Same thing with the bile. You may get a good quality products. I wouldn't just buy anything on Amazon as far as ox bile or TUDCA. I personally use the Body Balance, TUDCA, and then Algae Research Group, their ox bile. So I've checked them out.
I'll
They do,
link to all this.
yeah. There are other sources out there that are great. It's just those are the ones I've kind of landed on.
Well, this has been so incredibly helpful. If people want to learn more about you, I'm obviously going to link to your website. You've got a wonderful website and it's got some resources on it as well,
Yeah,
like a blog.
that's richmondfunctionalmedicine.com. And
Mhm.
I'm put that as like my landing thing for education. There's food plans there. There's blogs. I've gotten sidetracked a little bit with COVID this last year. I've been doing COVID 24/7. I was hoping to stop doing that. And then now I've got long COVID 24/7. So I'm hoping to get back to focusing on regular education. So if you want more information, I just put out there. It's all up for free. You can just kind of download it and look at and share it. It's at richmondfunctionalmedicine.com. So
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Well, there's so many topics to discuss. I hope this won't be the last time that you can join
yeah.
us.
Well,
And
yeah, I have a special place in my heart for kids with special needs because all of my kids have some kind of special need based on their past and stuff. And it's just it's amazing if you have love of a parent. I've learned don't mess with special needs moms because like my wife is one. I got lots of friends. It's just like that dogness that you're gonna do anything for your kid you possibly can, and there's nothing you're not gonna do. It's just like, and to give those people like just simple tools, they will knock it out of the ballpark. And it's just I just have a special place in my heart for those families. So
yeah, well, thank you. And I really appreciate you joining us. And thanks so much for your time today.
yeah, well, thanks a lot for inviting me. If
Okay,
anything I can do for you, just let me know.
thank you.